to Tiawa / future-proof, which is why we've grouped them together so we can discuss them consecutively. Now, this is with the permission of this committee, and item 18 was not listed on the original agenda. Since it was a submission issued by council staff, or submitted, I should say, by council staff to an RMA process, and which we were alerted to on Friday by the General Manager, I questioned the process and asked for that item to be brought forward, and I initially suggested the public excluded part of the meeting, but since the submission is a public document anyway, and while there might be some issues related to individual people that lodged it and things like that, the important thing was the submission itself, which is a public document. So I've proposed in the agenda, which we've confirmed to date, but it's still up for council to agree to discuss that, or to committee, I should say, to agree to discuss it. I propose that be in public, so that any discussion we have is open, and it's about the submission itself and whether we support it or oppose it. and what the process involved in lodging those submissions are. So I've asked the General Manager to bring it forward into this part of the agenda, have a discussion on that first, which flows into the other two subjects. The reason it's grouped with future-proof is because the future-proof information that we've received has said that they followed the Hamilton City Council submissions lead, if you like, or staff lead, in putting in their own submission about this, which then raised questions in the minds of some of us about the process that future-proof itself follows. So we thought, to get it in order, we should look at the HCC submission first, what we think about both the thrust of the submission and about the process involved, and then discuss future-proof and any role it had in that, and that as a secondary thing, if I'm making sense there. So I've asked the General Manager actually to introduce this. I know Luke put the submission together and lodged it, but those have to be approved by the management executive, basically. Yeah, so we have the situation is we've got a submission put in by council on our behalf, which at least some councillors are not happy with or have concerns about, but whether you support or oppose, we've never had any say over that. We've never had any oversight of it. So I'm bringing it to this committee with your approval so that we can have that oversight and we can approve it or oppose it or amend it at this point, is my view. So firstly, I'm asking for, I guess, if any councillors are unhappy with us discussing this today, well, let's have a discussion about that first. I think that's proper. So Gary signalled that, so let's do that first before we get onto the substantive matter of this submission itself, if that's okay. And I'll just say that my reason for bringing it here is because I believe that the whole issue of that particular project, Te Awa, has been in front of us, Te Awa Lakes I should say, has been in front of us as a council before, and that we should make our stance known to staff before we should be asked for our stance before they put in the submission. And I note in saying that the last council had a process whenever there was a change proposed to the district plan or a debate submitted to the district plan, they sort of came to our council for high-level instructions, if you like, about which direction of travel we should follow, and then staff went away with a reference group of councillors and decided the details and the tactics that would be followed. So I can't remember the name of that reference group. You were on it last time, Rob, and I was on it the time before. I can't remember who else was. No, we didn't have one for this. Yeah, I'm saying what we did with previous district plan changes and appeals and so forth, that there was that process was going on. And this time it hasn't gone to council at all since we decided to approve putting into action the district plan variation process. So before we go to staff, Gary, open the floor to you to say why you think we shouldn't be discussing this now.
Would like some advice from maybe Leanne or maybe, I don't know who else here can maybe look at them. Just on, do we risk failing due process or something in what we do? What are the risks that we would do it? If I just want to be what risks are there to us in terms of unfavourable process or something?
Are you talking about due process as far as meeting process goes?
No, as far as plan change type processes, which is I think the legal process we're going through, isn't it?
In other words, can we review a submission already put in? Is that?
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And the privacy aspect, and also I understand, I could be wrong now, but these guys are doing a special housing thing as well, aren't they? So they've got 2 trains going, haven't they? Yeah.
But we haven't received a special housing application, whereas we hadn't at the time of the district plan. variation. So, Luke, you've heard the discussion, so help enlighten us.
with
Yeah.
your-
Sorry, I'm presuming, even from your point of view, Gary, you're happy to have this discussion.
Oh,
at
the
this
discussion
point.
needs to be had. I just,
Yeah. Okay.
want to make sure we're doing it the right way.
Yep. You, the two of you, yeah.
Okay. So what I thought I would do is walk you through our rationale as to where we are with this submission. But certainly it is clear to us as staff and to myself as the GM that we have erred in not coming back to you with our view on that submission earlier and giving you some form of briefing. We felt that we were in line with your views, but and I'll explain that further. But certainly there's no issue on our behalf about having Chairman raise the issue of not having a process to bring back the submission and our thoughts and rationale to you to do that. So I laid that on the table first.
So, Calvin, just before you go on, so in terms of my issues and Gary's issues, it's okay for us to discuss this now and form a view on the submission itself.
So that question I might revert to our legal counsel about our ability or not
Lachlan, can you help us? I'm
Yes,
sure
I
you
can.
can always help us.
Yes, Mr Chairman.
Do you want to grab him a chair?
He normally brings his own.
Sorry, Andrew.
Do you think someone should give it a high-level view of what's happened? Because I'm sure there's people around this table who have no idea.
Well, everyone's been sent the email and the further email from Amy last night clarifying what was being put up here. The question is are we in order discussing it now? And then that's exactly what Calvin's going to do to outline what led to the particular submission.
Yep, correct.
But
That's exactly
Lachlan's going to help us. Are we okay with what the process we're trying to follow now?
Yes, and I think the short point is you are so far. If the purpose of the discussion is to have some open dialogue around the process that led to the submission and the submission itself, there's certainly nothing out of order in terms of that being a topic for discussion in this particular committee. The question then becomes, and what do you then do with it? If you start to move into territory around exploring changing the submission and making process changes, we might just need to pause at that point and have a talk about what you can and cannot do. But it may be that we come back to that and have the discussion about the history and the context, and then if there is some suggestion or will to move into change mode, it might be a good time to pause and check in.
Okay, that makes sense to everyone so far. So we'll stay there because we're going to come back to you.
Yeah, we'll need them.
Kelvin.
Okay, so thanks, Chairman. So certainly we, as staff, just to recap, so we've been working with the proponents on the plan change for over 12 months. And the basis of that work was to get to a point where when they submitted the application as they wanted to do before Christmas, that we would have all the issues identified, narrowed down to a very narrow brief so that it would have the greatest chance of moving through into the next stages of the process. We did that up until the point where they then submitted, and we have done briefings with you on this, and I know they've all met with you individually around the process. And at the September 21st council meeting, we put forward a process that then said you could either adopt, accept or reject, and the resolution was that we would, as a council, accept the proposal, which meant that that then, as Chairman said, opens it up to the RMA considerations of the effects of that. At the time we had a discussion, there was no major issues from councillors. We understood that people were generally in support, and again, as staff, we've been working with them on that support basis for some time. So then we moved to the submission and the formation of the submission. And when we sat down to do that as a technical document, the submission's audience is the hearings commissioners, which is the delegated authority within the resolution, so the independent hearing, and then the environment court. So the submission is at a level of detail and evidence which is of a legal standing. So that is the audience. It's not for us, it's not for council, not for the public consumption, it is at that level. And so we felt we understood that we would start at a point of support for the proposal and work through all the issues on our behalf, which we did so. Now, after all that time, at the end of that process, the fair balance against issues was that we could not be seen to put our staff in front of a hearings panel and an environment court where they said we support it, conditional support, when we have the balance of identified matters being in the negative, i.e. we had more issues to resolve than we did in support. And when you look at the submission document, there are areas that we do support, and there's some part support, and there's some opposition, and there's some we need more material. So it's a very widespread. But effectively, just to use some numbers, if you have 50 different identified issues and we've got 30 of them in the negative, it doesn't give the credibility for then having our top evidence people stand in front of a court to say we would support this when the balance is in the negative. However, we did make sure that we said in the document, and again taken on board the council, our understanding of the council's view, that the rationale would be we would move or could move to a position of support once we had these matters satisfied to the balance of our understanding. And now I know some people have asked us, so why couldn't we have stayed in a neutral position? And the rationale behind that is that we are the then regulating authority. So once the private plan change is done, the development is done, we still have to carry the can for the performance of that site in relativity to the rest of the city. So we believed that the rationale was that we should take a purist, straight back, evidential, legal approach to say we oppose, conditional on these things being resolved. And the rationale behind that strategy is that then gets us a seat at the table with all parties who are to the process to enable us to find resolution with all parties in agreement and then move forward to support. So we were very clear to say it is opposition, conditional on us being able to resolve these issues. So that is the rationale. That is where we got to. And I reiterate, I think we should have come back to you and given you that briefing as such so you understood where we were coming from. So I do take that point.
Kelvin, could I just ask a question? You said you decided in order to have a seat at the table to present the sum of which was a negative sum of our questions, so that you could have a seat at the table. Could you not have had a seat at the table saying we neither support nor oppose and here are our questions like Waikato District have done?
So yes, you can, and we did discuss that thought as well. However, the point is that as the regulating authority, so when this is all done and dusted, we then carry the can for ensuring the performance of that site against that. And we felt that given that we have that role, i.e., and there are issues around things like water discharge and treatment, the geotechnical abilities and those things that actually promote public safety and environmental health, we felt that as a regulating authority, those who then have to monitor the performance of that development once it's done, we needed to take a stronger stance to give guidance from how we would then look at what the level of detail we needed, and to be sure that in the long term, once we've adopted it, because we only get this chance, that it will perform to that standard. So that's why that was the rationale. And I do appreciate that we should have come back to you and explained it to you prior to the submission point.
What's the hearing, the submissions and hearing timeline? I mean, are the submissions still open? When do they close, and how does that work?
So the submission period closed last week. So the hearings, no date has been determined yet for the hearing. So when this council made a decision to accept the plan changes, one of the recommendations that was also endorsed by the council was to appoint independent commissioners. So we've approached those independent commissioners, and a hearing date hasn't been set yet. I wouldn't expect it to be any earlier than April next year.
Okay. So is there any opportunity in a technical sense for either late submissions or for amendments to existing submissions?
I mean, the short point is yes. And in fact, that's exactly what the Hamilton City Council submission signals. So it is, as Kelvin's explained, it starts off from a position of saying it's conditional opposition, and here are the reasons why we oppose. And as Kelvin has identified, it's largely because of information gaps in the plan change documents themselves and the technical material that supports the plan change. So what the submission does is say, look, here are the things that just remain unresolved that need to be addressed in order to get us over the line and be supportive of the plan change. And what the submission says is that if these issues can be resolved to our satisfaction, council's position may move from opposition to neutrality or support. So there's language and words in the submission that say that. So what I have anticipated, and I think Luke has also anticipated, is that between now and the hearing, there is a huge amount of collaborative work that's done between council's team and the Te Awa team to resolve the issues that have been identified and get us to a point where on day one of the hearing, there is a list of issues which have basically had a tick put beside them, which will then influence council in saying, okay, we started off with opposition and we've now moved to something different. And I think if there is to be a move to something different after those technical issues have been addressed, as Kelvin has identified, that would be something that would appropriately be brought back here for approval if there's going to be any shift. So there is a mechanism and it involves using the time between now and the hearing, like as Lucas said, maybe May or April, to work with the applicant to get the ticks by the boxes.
And given that we've also heard that our submission or our staff's view, let's say, has influenced at least one other outside organisation, it would be time for them to also make a consequential change?
Yes, it would. I mean, I think that the short answer to this, can we change? Can we move our position on the submissions? Is that you can move one direction, but you can't move the other. So if you've supported something, it's very difficult for you to then move into a position of opposition. There are natural justice concerns around shifting against the application. But if you've started off in opposition, you can shift towards support. So if you think about the future-proof position, for example, that may be the submission that you're alluding to, Mr. Chairman, that's one that starts off in opposition. And if it gets the same level of comfort and satisfaction that the city might get in terms of ticking off the information gaps and areas of concern, it could conceivably turn up on the first morning of the hearing or before that and say, we're happy. So that opportunity is open for those submitters in opposition, but you can't work it back the other way, in the other direction.
And if I might, Mr. Chairman, it's not just about ourselves and the proponents of the application, it's also all of those who have submitted either for or against and actually working in solutions across all of those players. So there are 7, I think, in opposition. So it's about 10. Yeah, 10. So it's about our ability to work across. Some of our issues will be pertinent to Hamilton City alone. Some will be common across all, and then others will have issues that are relevant to them alone. But it is about finding how we resolve common issues to a satisfactory level across all of that play, and that I think is still quite an important part.
Okay.
Councillor McPherson, sorry to interject, I just wanted to say that it's very similar to how we shifted when the Ruakura Board of Inquiry came through. So as an example, so for new elected members, 3 years ago when we had a very undercooked plan change, lacking in information that the city didn't support, the time between the submission's just a marker and a point of time. It wasn't our definitive position. It was a position that reflected the level of information that we had at that particular point in time, and it was a robust technical assessment like what we've done here. What we did with Ruakura is not working with the applicant, TGH, plus other parties over the period between the submissions closing and the hearing starting. We pretty much resolved most of the issues. So by the time we got to the hearing, the things that weren't agreed were actually very, very narrow in scope. So we could turn up at the hearing and actually present to the board almost the same level of support that TGH themselves were doing. And so this document now is not the definitive position of the planning analysis for the project in its entirety. It's a position that reflects where we are right now in a long process.
And those decision points for the Board of Inquiry hearing for the TGH inland port application were all reported to council and debated quite heavily, including with votes and all.
There was the council resolved in 27th of February 2014 to form a subcommittee where full delegation of the council had been given to a group consisting of the previous chief executive, the mayor, the deputy mayor, and 3 other councillors, where we would go and check in with them as we were writing our evidence, as we were preparing our documentation, and
But the initial position was voted on, was it not?
no, it certainly was emailed to elected members, but it wasn't reported to a formal committee meeting.
Oh, well, I'll have to show you where it was actually voted on. I mean, I was one of a number of councillors that actually had a vote and voted against it.
That's, I think, the private plan change application that you're referring to, the one that was before the Board of Inquiry, where the council did come before this
Also
council.
our position to the Board of Inquiry. There was a council vote on what position we would take. I lost the vote. Recall the vote.
Okay.
But anyway, that's by the by in a way, because we're where we are now. I'm opening it up to the question, to the list on the floor we've got at the moment. Jeff, did you remove your... Yeah, okay.
I'm sorry, Mr Chair, can I just one point?
Sorry.
No, my mistake. What I'm hearing is that, and as Luke has eloquently outlined, this is the start of a point, and our intention is that as long as we can get resolution on all those issues, we can move to that point. And I think it's how do we report back the progress against that to this group as elected members, so that you can feel a sense of comfort that things are progressing, and that when you believe it is time, and with our input, you can make that call. And ideally we can do that as part of a hearing. And as those of us who've been involved in these processes before, we know that's an ongoing negotiation that happens right up to hearings and through hearings up until the final judgments. So that is the intent, to keep moving them down that track.
I think out of this we also probably want some assurance that we're going to be asked the question at the start, here's our view, this is our recommendation, what do you think?
No, and I take that for these sorts of areas. We should bring that back to you earlier than 1 o'clock on the Friday when it's due. So, fair call.
Gary, you've also removed your name. Yeah, okay, Paula.
Okay, so you did answer part of my question when you referred to the Ruakura. So this is really just about keeping ourselves safe in that legal challenge field should that come up with other stakeholders, right? So we have to do due diligence across that. So presumably they, Te Awa weren't entirely surprised or disturbed. They saw it as guidance to create a better application, or?
Yeah, I've had a conversation with the technical planning team and discussed through. I've actually got a scheduled meeting to meet with them again later on this afternoon, depending on what time I get out of here. But it's there's certainly a willingness within the staff, both for myself personally and the rest of my team that are involved in this project, is to be positive about it. This was a very difficult thing for us to arrive at. Now, there are 2 volumes of information, and I can tell you I've read all of it. There were substantive issues, right, that we expected to see. So our role up to this point was to facilitate a process, right? So if you go back to the report that I put up to council about accepting that was not an evaluation of the project. That report was not an evaluation. It was this thing fit for purpose to commence the process? It made no commentary at all around the actual efficacy of the information or the robustness of the information, or was it fit for purpose for us as the city administering authority for the 4th largest metro to have the level of due diligence that will be expected of me and my team when we go into a hearing and any subsequent court processes. So that's the lens by which we've looked at it. We've looked at it from the perspective of, if I was being cross-examined in court in support of this document, what would we need to know definitively to stand there under oath and say to a judge, I've arrived at a support decision unequivocally for the following reasons. And when we did that, and when we documented that, and when we compared that to what we've got at the moment, there were gaps. And this was a very considered submission, notwithstanding the process issues which I accept responsibility for, notwithstanding those process-related issues. This is a lot of thought and effort's gone into it, and it is not by any stretch of the imagination the final word of the staff in terms of its participation in this process.
No, and it's to inform the hearings process as well, isn't it?
It's very typical in what is this is a very large urban development project.
Yeah.
It's seeking a very fundamental change to the land use and investment framework that Perry's themselves have supported, along with a whole range of other major industrial owners over the last 10 to 15 years. So the scale of the change that they're seeking is a difficult one, no doubt about it. And we're trying to work with them to do this. If they just wanted to build an adventure park and nothing else, they could probably secure a resource consents to do that, and they wouldn't have to go through the plan change. The difficulty is all the other things that come with it. The 80% of the site, which is actually not an adventure park. So that's the scale of the challenge. Our submission has been constructed in a positive way. It signposts very clearly what it is, and very, very keen to work with them to work through all of those issues. And starting from this afternoon, if I can get there at 4:30 this afternoon.
Oh, I won't ask you too many more questions, but I was going to say, I guess you're looking at all the relevant planning documents. You've got to sign it off against the regional policy statement, which is a give effect to.
Yeah, and those.
Future proof, which is the strategy that is given priority in the RPS and district plan, right?
Absolutely, those things are. We can't change the regional policy statement. That's a framework that's been embedded. That's the parameters by which this council and myself and everyone else has to operate under. And we have to work within the legal frameworks and the statutory planning frameworks that we've got at the moment, and that's informed the way in which we've composed this submission. But I want to reassure elected members that we are working with the applicant to try and resolve them. It will need other parties who have made submissions to also participate in that in a collaborative way, and that's something that we'll be looking to do early in the new year. Some caucusing.
Luke, sorry, have you finished?
One last question. So
Sorry.
some of that will probably be around mitigation of effect. You've got the change of zone, which is one thing, which is quite a substantial change of zone from what was what they themselves supported when the regional policy statement was in development. But anyway, that happens. Times change, but they're going to have to manage some of the on-site effects, and that includes transport and water and a lot of other bits and pieces. Yeah.
That's correct. All of those things.
Thank you.
Luke, I think you're about to say something about the special housing area
Look, it was
application.
just to remind elected members that we do have 2 special housing area applications for this site as well. They have been lodged. They are 2 applications that were lodged in the first expression of interest round, and we're currently we've issued a further information request to them for that, and submissions on all the special housing areas, because we're in accordance with the policy, we've gone out to seek public feedback in relation to all of those expressions of interest, and that for this site only closed yesterday, so we're still just compiling all of the submissions. There's a report coming to you on the 14th of December just to provide an update about all SHA's applications, but there's no completed evaluation of any of the expressions of interest budgets in place, which you've already agreed to send to the Minister.
And we're still awaiting definitive advice from the Minister as to what his views are on SHAs moving forward, about how he will play those, or if at all. So.
Rob, sorry.
Yeah, my question has been partly answered. It was about the SHA and whether they were going to lodge an application, and they've now told us that they have. Is the requirements under the SHA likely to be less stringent than the plan change, or are we likely to be submitting back to, and I don't want to preempt what you're going to do because obviously you've just got the application, but are the conditions that you might put around an SHA likely to be less stringent and different to the plan change?
It's the same issues, right? So to the extent that even the applicant themselves, when they lodge their application for the special housing area, they totally relied upon all of the technical documentation in the plan change. So they've kind of essentially just repackaged some of that information, said refer to the various technical reports in support of the plan change. Some of them have been reassessed, for the purposes of one of the SHAs, because it's much smaller. It's only 7 hectares of the total 80, but the issues are the same. but the way in which we assess them is slightly different because the provisions under the Housing Accords and Special Housing Areas Act are different to the RMA. So there are some slight differences in how we assess those and what our policy gives.
So given that
preference
you've
to.
got both applications, and I appreciate they are slightly different, is the applicant likely to get a faster track decision with an SHA than they would with a plan change?
Yes, if they, once they provide the additional information we've asked for, we can complete our assessment. This council makes a decision to recommend it as an SHA to the minister or not. So it does not go to an independent hearings panel like you do for the plan change. So there is a different approval. So for the plan change, you made a decision to outsource that to independent commissioners. For the special housing area applications, once those assessments have been completed, they will come to this council for a decision.
Thank you.
Okay. Mayor Andrew, thanks.
So you just said that we made the decision on the plan change to go to independent commissioners. That's what you just said, wasn't it?
That's correct.
So this council made that decision.
On the 21st of December, yes, this council made a decision to outsource and to delegate its hearing and decision-making powers to independent commissioners.
So who else is opposed? Who are the other 10 people?
New Zealand Transport Agency,
So did we approach the New Zealand Transport Agency about this before they came to us? Did we talk to them? Did we make any communication with them?
Yes, I've had phone calls with them. That's standard practice on large matters. I talk to people at the Transport Agency all the time on a range of planning and development matters.
So we alerted NZTA to the matter?
No, it's not what happened.
So they rang you?
Yes,
So the first contact was them to you?
yes.
Who else? Future-proof?
Waikato Regional Council.
So who did they pick up the phone and ring you?
Yes, so they knew about the plan change and they wanted to come in and meet with us to understand the documentation. So we had a meeting with them at their request.
So every one of the 10?
No, not every one of the 10.
Or which ones did you pick up the phone and ring them?
The only person I proactively called was to have a discussion with the implementation advisor from Future-proof, and it was to talk through where we were getting to in terms of our analysis to land the submission. The other parties that have opposed that are private development entities: Ports of Auckland, AFCO, Fonterra, I think it's called Open Country Milk, Contact Energy, and I've had no discussions at all with any of them about any of the content of the submission.
So when NZTA approached me, I made it very clear that this council was quite united and that there'd been no negative feedback from this council towards it, and at that stage they indicated they wouldn't oppose. So where did the turnaround come from?
I can't tell you. I'm not privy to any conversations you've had with anyone from NZTA.
So who drives these things, the elected members or the staff? Who gives direction?
I accept that from a procedural point of view that it would have been better for me to have certainly either reported the draft to this committee or full council or via email. And that's something I'll take responsibility for.
And certainly when we briefed you prior, before we put it out, Andrew, you seemed to be okay with it at that time.
Hang on, Andrew's questions were about the council knowing, or this committee. You're talking about some other process separate from this group, are you?
You're talking about when I got a phone call the day before you submitted,
Yeah,
or
that's
a
right.
couple of hours
Yeah.
before you submitted.
Yeah.
And I asked, is it very straightforward? And the answer was yes, these are very, and I talked through the chief executive, and my feedback was these are very easy things to be signed off. This is straightforward matter.
It is, and it's a straight back decision that we've made based on, as I've outlined, the evidence and the technical requirements.
And I asked at that
we've said that we've
So
erred.
Andrew, just let him finish,
Yeah,
thanks.
and we have said, we've said we've erred if we haven't brought that back to you for that decision. Whether that, if your question is whether that would have changed the content of the submission from a staff evidence base, no, because it is evidence and technical of nature. Would it have changed how we approached the approach? No, because it's an evidence and technical nature. Would it have changed how we may have framed our opposition or potential support? Possibly.
So all of these plan changes and all of these people who are asking for changes to the new plan and Ruakura and all of these things, have they been totally driven by elected members in the past?
So I'm not quite sure, Councillor Mayor King, what you...
So the question I think the Mayor is asking is previous positions on plan change been a direction of the elected wing, or has it been like suggested in this case it was a technical matter in terms of our position putting forward?
The only other thing that I can refer to was the submission we put in for the Ruakura Board of Inquiry. My recollection was that it was submitted as a draft via email, not reported, but I know, noting that Councillor McPherson has a different recollection of that, but that was an email that we sent through to elected members as a draft to say this needs to be submitted to the Environment Protection Authority. I think it was on a Tuesday and it was sent on a Thursday or Friday. And from memory, I had no response from any elected member at all on that draft.
We certainly had, as a council, in the first term of Julie Hardacre as mayor, quite significant discussions about our stance before the Board of Inquiry on the TGH application, and about 2 or 3 years prior to that, we had very robust discussions with our previous planning manager and staff on Temple View plan change, and made a number of made that decision on what submission we would put into that, and in fact instructed staff on who they should consult with around that as well. So that's something that this council on those two issues has certainly done quite a bit of on some of these key changes to the district plan.
I think one of the key things is the extent to which we support the Perry's submission through the rest of this process, not the submission, the plan change through the rest of this process. Because one of the conversations I've had since the discussion we had earlier, actually yesterday, Dave, is making sure we put in making sure that we support them from a resource point of view to progress. When it comes down to it, the position we're in, we could put support the application and have all the outstanding issues. If those issues haven't been dealt with when we go to court, we still can't support, when they individually interrogate us on each one of those points, we can't provide positive assurance to the outcome of those areas without actually having done the work with them. So one way or another we need to do the work. Whether we support or otherwise won't change the underlying target for each one of those individual points below that. So it's, into Luke's point and to tie in with Andrew's, it's how effectively, Calvin's point, it's how effectively we support and be seen to supporting Perry's through this process. And one of the things we are going to do is make sure we spend a lot more time, even though we have spent a significant amount of time, with the right people at Perry's to drive this forward.
And I think, and I certainly certainly understand my opening comments were that we felt that we understood where the council wanted to be seen to support the plan change, and we certainly started from that point of view. It was only when we get through the technical nature of the line-by-line items that it becomes almost nonsensical to stand in front of to put my staff in front of a
That would have been
judge.
the point to come back
Correct.
to council and
And
say,
that's exactly right, Chairman.
our advice is so-and-so.
Quite correct. And so that, and as I say, that is the point that I think the area that we've missed to bring you to that same conclusion, or not, but at least we've had that debate and have a robust debate around that. So I do take that.
And I think it's clear from what you've said before, Calvin, already, that you could equally have put in a neutral, neither support nor oppose submission with the same list of questions required to be worked through, and then you could have reported your findings at the end of that to the hearing, or made a late, from what Lachlan says, made a late change to support it if you wanted to go that direction.
Indeed, that was an option that was considered, and again, the only rationale to our point was that once the plan changes an act, we are then the authority that has to oversee that. So we felt that we needed to take a stronger stance to ensure we could get those issues addressed to the manner we wanted. And again, it's not just our issues; it's the other 9 in opposition as well. So that's the rationale, and I do take the point that I think had we had the debate and a robust debate around that and got people to that point, or we would have got the direction it was at least understood what our future is, the future position is, and the future position, once those things are met to our satisfaction, and we can report that back on a regular basis to this group, then we've indicated that we can change to a point of support.
Yeah, Paula?
Can I continue?
Sorry, I've got Paula on the list. Oh, haven't you? Sorry, Andrew, I thought
Sorry,
you had.
I got taken over by about 5 staff members 10 minutes ago.
And myself.
So what was the urgency to lodge, what was the urgency on the timeframe to lodge?
Statutory deadline.
Yeah. What brought the statutory deadline on?
The Resource Management Act, there is a defined time period once the plan change is notified. You've got a set time period by which to make a submission, and it took us effectively the majority of that time to do the robust analysis and to work up the submission.
So you made up your mind, you were doing this on the day you lodged?
Not at all. It's a combination of, when you see the submission and a number of pages and a number of issues, there's no making up your mind on the one day. It's as you get through a process and you can see that the issues are over
So
a
when did
number
you
we
make
could
up
have
your
won.
mind that you were going to lodge? How many days before the
Well, I
deadline?
think Luke's answered that. Given everything else we've got going on, we needed to use the time right to the end of that last days to get to the point where we could lodge on the day. And then when you
but
see the
when
numbers,
did you
And
make
Andrew, please let him finish.
so that was the time we got to the finish on the day that we were able to lodge, or a couple of days before that when we were trying to get around and work it through as a submission and then lodge on the day.
So when did you decide you were going to oppose?
Well, when we get to the summation of that, all that information, it became apparent to us that we felt as a staff that we couldn't put an evidential point there.
Councillor, Mayor King, we'd been analysing and going through the information in a sequential and iterative process, starting from the day of notification, and it wasn't probably until almost that last week where where me with my team had sort of landed at a position that it was a position of opposition with because of all the substantive issues that have been contained in the submission itself. So there was no predetermination at all about whether or not this was something we were going to oppose. We've worked very proactively with the applicant over the better part of a year. We did a robust analysis about whether or not this thing should have been accepted or rejected in the first place, and that's the first question, really. I think any serious opposition to us in terms of predetermination would have manifested itself at that particular point, because we would have made a recommendation to you that we don't even notify this particular document. But we saw that it had merit, saw that it was a concept that was worthy of testing through a process. We hadn't completed an evaluation of the material at that time. And 2 telephone books worth of documentation doesn't take substantially longer than a few days to work its way through to make a comprehensive assessment of it.
So when did you decide you were going to oppose?
I don't have the exact date, but it would have been very close to within a week of actual lodging it. So that was where we'd got to, after 3 weeks of analysis, or close to 3 weeks of analysis, thinking that this was a logical place for us to be. And then the last part of that week was actually working through and finishing the document itself.
So you decided to oppose 7 days before? Is that what you're saying? A week?
I don't have the exact date, but it would be close to that. It would have been somewhere between the 3rd and the 4th week of the submission period, where we were starting to form that it was looking like an opposition to.
So did you then tell NZTA what you were going to do, future-proof what you were going to do, and like had a regional council and everyone else at that stage, or had they made...
my
Can I
conversations...
finish? Had they made their mind up totally independently, or did you discuss it with these other parties?
The only party that I had a discussion with was the Future-Proof Implementation Advisor. Each of those submissions, though, are made by themselves. I don't think that I influenced or instructed them to make a submission in any particular way, just like I didn't for any of the commercial entities that also made submissions in opposition to the project.
So you didn't tell NZTA before they made their decision that you were opposed?
I don't recall saying that to them. I had my conversation with NZTA was before the period of time that where we had landed internally, that it was looking like it was in opposition.
So your email trail will back that up?
Absolutely.
I don't think we're getting into that sort of inquiry here, Mayor Andrew.
I just think that if these things are being driven politically or they're being driven by staff, and I don't...
I think that sorry.
I just think,
wait.
I'm just asking about the timelines here of 7 days of knowing.
Yeah.
And elected members have.
Yeah, Andrew, sorry, that's not a question now. I'm about to put a resolution to the meeting, which we'll be able to debate and say what we think. Just hang on, Paula. You're on the list. I've seen your hand. I've acknowledged you. You can wait until I've finished, thanks. I'm going to put a resolution where we can debate our views on what's happened in that. But it's just time for questions to the staff at the moment. Thanks, Paula.
I found this questioning quite interesting because I just like a comment from perhaps Lachlan in terms of appropriate process. There's a place, isn't it correct that there is a place for the political oversight of plans and strategies and the like, and to receive information about those, but there is a point at which it is about the technical evidence and assessment, and it's actually reasonably unhelpful at that time for politicians to play politics over a plan. It can undermine the legal outcome of that, can't it? You've got to go off the planning documents that you have and do an evidence-based assessment, because that's the only thing that's going to keep this strong in court. And by identifying some evidential gaps and allowing the applicant to do better in answering those, it's going to put them in a better position to be successful in the long term. What's not going to help, however, is political interference in what is essentially...
Paula, you're
I'm
now
asking
getting
a question.
Well, that's not
I
a
am
question.
asking. Thank you, Dave. I'm asking a question.
Well, I mean, my observation would be this. I mean, I think what this debate and discussion illustrates is the point where the politics and the political aspects of plan making intersect with the technical and the professional. And it is no surprise that at that intersection it is at times challenging. So, you know, I think we all just need to understand that there is an intersection point and we're right at it. The critical point is that the technical information that goes into the submission is technical information which needs to be owned by professionals, planning professionals and technical professionals who can get in front of a tribunal or a court and can withstand scrutiny, cross-examination and the testing of their evidence. So, for example, there is no point in a submission being presented which is entirely directed by the politics if there is no evidence and no technical evidence which can then support it. There has to be an alignment between the political and the technical. And that really is what I think this process has identified. What Luke, I think, has endeavoured to do, and Kelvin has endeavoured to do, is assure this committee that the submission is founded upon good professional analysis. There is nothing in the submission which strays outside of their professional expertise, and it reflects a proper professional analysis. The issue, as I identified, is that what probably needed to happen, what definitely needed to happen, was that then needed to be shared with this committee to say, here's what the professional evidence is telling us, this is what the direction of travel is going to be in terms of the evidence, and this is what it looks like in terms of a submission. If at that point this committee or the elected wing thought, well, we're not happy with that direction, then that would be a moment where you would have to back out of the staff recommendations and put your own submission forward, which just simply reflected politics but didn't have any technical support. And that wouldn't be an ideal position for the council to be in. The best position to be in is one where we've got alignment. And, you know, I come back to this point. I think that we can achieve alignment. There's been definitely a dropped ball here in terms of bringing back the the direction of travel to this committee, and that's been evident, and I think that's accepted. But there is plenty of opportunity in this process to check back in with you. We've got a submission which is currently in opposition, but it signals that if we get issues identified and addressed, we can move to support or neutrality, and we can bring that back to you and check in between now and the hearing so that we can keep that alignment. So I'm not sure if I've strayed from the question, but there's a little speech in there anyway.
No, just
Paula,
that did answer it, thank you.
Okay. So, councillors, there's no one on the list for questioning now, so I've got a proposed resolution, which if we can get that up on the board would be great, thanks, which received the report, and I've got B there, requests, it's not A, the General Manager, report back to the next Growth and Infrastructure Committee meeting on future process for involving elected members in key high-level planning issues. Because there are a couple of other issues that have also come up in the last few months. So that's saying, bearing in mind that the General Manager has already said that he's going to be reporting back on this particular issue along the way anyway. That's to say, how do we avoid getting in these situations in the future? So that's my, I'll move that from the chair. I've got seconded by Councillor Casson. A question on that first before we go into speaking, Gary?
I have some substantive concerns about this, and I've raised them before, particularly about Fonterra's existing position. Would that process there, can use some big fancy words, elucidate, would that highlight their concerns and make sure their concerns and other submitters' concerns to us, to the process? It doesn't shut anyone out?
No, from here on in, all the submissions are public, so we're able to utilise those submissions to highlight those issues.
This is meant to discuss process, Gary, rather than a particular thing. So
yeah, well, the process...
If something else comes up, how do we make sure no one is shut out?
That's exactly my point. I want to make sure that, I mean, I was giving an example of one that's probably well known around this thing, but the issue is I want to make sure that that doesn't shut, nothing we're doing now shuts other people out. It doesn't say submissions are closed or anything like that.
No. Okay. I think what we're hearing is the ability, to answer your question, Councillor, to bring all issues to the table that are known to staff for a discussion with council around future submissions or planning advice, and have that discussion as they are known to us, and of course that is something we can pull together.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to take speakers on that now. I'll speak as the mover. Simply to actually follow on some points that Lachlan made, there is a lot of technical work that goes into our planners' work, a lot of technical background and knowledge in that. And at the end of the day, like any other part of council, I believe they're responsible for presenting their technical arguments, their case, their recommendations to the elected members, who then, within whatever laws apply, make the final decision or the decisions along the way. And it's not a matter, where I slightly differ from Lachlan, it's not a matter of if we disagree, therefore we'll have to go off and do our own thing, put in our own submission, which is something I've done before, and actually it ended up more on my side than staff's many years ago, but that was to do with a traffic issue over in Hamilton East. But sometimes, and this is a classic case, there's a choice to be made. The staff have said we could have chosen, having heard all that technical information, to have put in a neutral submission with the same list of questions, and we would have had status at the hearing, and all of our questions would have been the same, yet there might have been a different public perception, different perception by some of the other organisations on what our stance was, what our direction of travel was. I think inadvertently, with the best intentions from staff, we have ended up being seen on a side here when we didn't have to be yet at this point. I'm sure by the time we reached the hearing we would have had to be taken aside, but not yet. And I think the same sort of thing happened a few months ago with the Harrowfield situation. I think we didn't follow all the internal processes of consulting with councillors that we perhaps could have in order to help us feel comfortable with the direction of travel of staff. Now, some people agree or disagree with that, but I think if we bring it back to councillors in every case, then someone with Gary's view, someone with my view, we all get the opportunity to have our say and to participate in making the final decision. And I've seen this council, we pretty much always take staff technical views very seriously, and has to be very strong reasons, and we have to have the legal ability if we oppose them. But we do have that right at the end of the day, and we should always be given that right at the end of the day. So that's where I'm coming with that, and I know the General Manager will work with me and Jeff and other councillors and managers to try and come up with a process so that we don't get ourselves in this sort of challenge, as Lachlan called it, or conflict or whatever in future. So that's where I'm coming from. It's open to the floor, and we've first got Jeff.
Look, I think the key for me is that we have an assurance from Kelvin and Luke that, or an acknowledgement that we should have been probably consulted a bit earlier, and that we will be consulted along the line as we go from now on. I'm not going to dwell on it, but Christmas drinks. Just got an email from Andrew. Disappointed that.
Thanks for listening, Ian.
They put me off my stride. That that the planning department didn't see fit to consult, because I mean I think it's understandable that we are interested in this. It's a $1 billion project which could have a profound impact on Hamilton. So of course we're interested. Of course we want to know what's going on, and we want some input. I understand Lachlan's point well about there is a distinction between the political views and the planning expertise. Yeah, I guess I'm signalling that I very much want to be in the loop with what's happening from now on. Thanks.
Thanks. Siggy.
Just following on actually from Councillor Jeff, that I mean I like that project, and I wanted, and seeing then the email trail, it wasn't very encouraging. So I had my say, and you might have got it or you might not, I'm not sure, doesn't matter. But but it's, yeah, being kept in the loop and just knowing, and I don't understand all the technical stuff and the legal stuff, but it is so important for us to know what's going on, and especially a project that in that caliber that doesn't come every day across our desk. And as we all signaled, we're interested in that project, and it's an amazing project. So it was just a shock to the system for me, especially with all the other things going on at the same time. So it's nice to know that from now on we will be kept in the loop and and everything clarified more. I think it's really, really important to clarify more in detail what's going on. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Martin Gallagher, just noting that we've sort of had, would be 3 speeches in favour, and we're getting to the point where we don't want everyone to speak the same way. We'll cut off the debate rather than have everyone saying the same thing. But if someone wants to say something different after the Deputy Mayor, because he got on the list.
Well, I could say I'm undecided, then I'll make up my mind at the end of my contribution.
People would quite expect that of you.
I mean, I think item B is good, is that we do look at that intersect. What we must never do ever is compromise a professional, and a professional must always have the integrity and freedom to give their professional advice. That's what you purchase, that's what you pay a salary for. The difficult bit, I guess, and Lachlan highlighted this, is where we have a divergence, so you have a clear, consistent professional advice and a higher level, if you like, political objectives. So I think in this case there's a higher level political objective. This council wants to support a particular project at a higher level. However, the professionals are pointing out a series of significant fish hooks in that. And in terms of the fish hooks, that they are underbound. If we're in a hearing situation of giving evidence, then very clearly professional must never, ever compromise their, they're not appearing before a tribunal as an individual. They're appearing before a tribunal as a profession. I, however, am appearing as a councillor which wants to achieve so. So I think, Kelvin and Luke, what we look forward to is just trying to work through if you like, that kind of tricky balance, and where you do have, if you like, a divergence between what we want to achieve as an elected, governance team versus the professional advice, how that can be expressed that does not in any way compromise the professionals in terms of their professional integrity, but also gives voice, if you like, to the elected wing, to the governance team who wants to reach an objective, acknowledging obviously there are fishhooks along the way. So I actually look forward, because I think that item B can be a really productive, constructive discussion. And I have to say that when you have that, I will be taking the findings to the DHB, because if you think I trust you, we could be a role model for the DHB. That is another issue in terms of involving the board, but that's another issue. I didn't really say that, please. I never said that, of course.
Yes, Mayor Andrew, thanks.
Yeah, we can be professional as we like about interpreting the district plan, but if the district plan isn't fit for purpose or isn't doing the job it should be doing, and if it's not enabling, and if our zoning isn't correct, we need to have a full review of the district plan. And I believe that's where we're heading. I think it was very good, Lachlan, when you said that it's very clear that there needs to be an alignment between the technical and the political, and that's correct. And I also thank you for acknowledging that your team dropped the ball on this, and I think we're in a position now to move forward on this. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Look, hang on, have we got... Sorry, Rob. Okay,
Look,
Rob's going to be the last.
I'll speak very quickly and keep it within the 3 minutes. But look, I also welcome what's in Part B. But the district plan is owned by the council. It's our document, and it's a structure for management to follow. We must always, as Deputy Mayor has indicated, we must always rely on the professional skills that management has to help chart a sensible direction. Just a lay view of the development at the lakes would suggest that the location of the development and the past use of the land would be challenging, particularly where the area is being brought now into a residential housing cell. And I also have the concern that council will always be the last man standing if there are any aspects of the plan that should fail. And so as council and as councillors, we should not lose sight of this. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Okay, I'm going to move to the vote. Well, let's do it by the board. Thanks. There's the resolution up there. That's
The motion is carried.
Thanks, Amy. Okay, moving on to item 14, which is the future-proof strategy adoption. And we're going to have Blair and Ken Tremaine from Future-Proof coming talking to us there. And just noting as they're coming up that it was discussed in the last item that Future-Proof has also put in a submission of opposition to Te Awa Lakes, but that was somewhat consequential, as we understand, to the HCC submission and HCC staff advice. So I'm just maybe asking Blair and Ken to address that a little bit in there, because I know there are going to be questions coming up about the process followed by Future-Proof as well, which I've raised with Blair.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair and Councillor. So the substantive issue today is the adoption of the Future-Proof strategy. However, possibly just touching on the point around the Future-Proof submission first in regards to Te Awa Lakes. I have had a discussion with the Chair and with the implementation advisor, Mr Ken Tremaine, beside me around the process that Future-Proof follows for submissions. And currently, the Future-Proof committee, where appropriate, placing submissions, does so under the delegation of the independent chair, Mr Bill Wasley, and where possible those submissions are discussed with the Implementation Committee, of which the Mayor and Councillor McPherson are members of, prior to the close date. However, where that is not possible, the Chair under delegation will place the submission and then they're retrospectively considered by the Implementation Committee. I have provided the Chair with a potential resolution if Council wishes to consider that, which would be that our members request at the next Implementation Committee a small change to that process for submissions, so that that any submission made by Future-Proof is considered by the Implementation Committee prior to it being lodged. And if a meeting cannot be held, then at a minimum they are circulated by email and or a phone call to allow the committee members a chance to give their comment on the submission prior to it being finalised. So that wording is available with the democracy staff if the council wishes to pass that resolution and then instruct our members to raise it at the next meeting.
And which part of where would that be written up, Blair?
It would be, so it's currently currently summarised in the terms of reference, so it would be an amendment to the terms of reference that Future-Proof has for both the Implementation Committee and that of the Chair. So it would just be a small change to that.
Okay, but that's not something we would decide ourselves where...
No, it's something that our members would take to the next meeting. I've talked it through with Mr Tremaine, and he would, if we passed that resolution, Ken would no doubt bring a report to the next committee for that committee to consider that.
Okay, well, we'll come to that further on, but if you want to give the report on this document,
sure.
And we'll come back to that in the final wrap-up if councillors wish.
Thank you. So I might ask Ken, as the implementation advisor to Future-Proof, to summarise the final Future-Proof document which is in front of us today, and I guess the process upon which we have got to the final, which was following submissions and consideration of submissions. So, Ken.
Thanks, Ken.
Thank you, Mr Chairman and members of the committee. Just by way of very quick summary, I think the background report that you have in front of you sets out the process that has been followed. It's in two stages. In particular, we wanted to make an update to the strategy, and NZTA was very keen on this, to manage some of the pressures in the North Waikato, and so that people were clear about where they were going from an NZTA investment point of view of the highway upgrade between Te Kaupata and Auckland. It's a whole program business case in there. We've been through quite an extensive hearing process. There have been a number of very clear amendments made, and Mr Chairman, yourself took a very active part in the actual hearings. I don't want to step out of line here, but actually made a very good contribution to it, and we documented that, and all that material is there. We've summarised the form of the document as simply as we can. We've also signalled that we'll move to work with the Regional Council on getting a more flexible approach to some of the things that would automatically turn up here and perhaps not fit so well. We need some criteria in there, and we talked those through, and you'll remember my explaining that. It's now a matter of working away, because we've got national policy statement targets to meet and some changes to the RPS. All that can be wrapped up at the same time. But if you can find your way to support this today, it is actually quite important, because then the partnership is going forward on a document that is adopted and that we can actually use for moving to the next stage through the national policy statement and our future development strategy that we have to do for the government.
Okay, so I've got some questions. Jeff and then Siggy at this stage.
Yeah, Dave, my questions just relate to the submission on the Te Awa planning change. Is that okay? I just wanted to clear that up a bit.
I'm happy.
Okay. I mean, I must admit, the communication processes involved there dented my confidence a little bit. Yeah. And I just wanted to clarify that when Future-Proof made the submission on Te Awa, when was that exactly?
Oh, we would have made it just, I haven't got the exact dates in front of me, we would have just made it perhaps the day before the submissions actually closed. Our process, we formed our own independent opinion. I don't have any weight myself to march off and do things. I talked to each of the partners. We had a substantial conference call with the Regional Council, spoke to NZTA at length. And I think we got to the view, by the time I waded through the 16 accompanying documents, and it took some time, I was just concerned that given the, I'll put it on the table, given the level of opposition from the neighbours, that we need to be technically quite robust, and where there are claims made and not perhaps taken through as far as they should be, you don't want the thing falling over in terms of the process.
Right.
So, but we did have a meeting scheduled for the 29th, at which I was going to put the submission forward, because that's what we would normally do. That was the only item of business. The error that we made was not to circulate it to the members.
Right, so we have two members on that.
Yes, you do.
And that's Mayor Andrew and Councillor McPherson.
Councillor McPherson,
so
yes.
did you contact them about your submission?
No. And that's the error that was made. I assumed that we were going to have a meeting of the committee to deal with the strategy. When I looked at all the resolutions, they were such that the amendments were all documented and the amendments were made, and we didn't need the meeting. So it is my error in not actually going out round the committee.
But subsequently, you would have emailed them or rung them to tell them what was happening, did you? Or?
No, that's the point. That's the error.
Well, yeah, so you didn't ask them before, and you didn't tell them
No,
afterwards.
and it's the whole partnership. It's the regional council representatives, etc. Waikato, Waipa, and Tangata Whenua.
And Jeff, this is the proposed resolution that I've got for the chair to put to the committee. This process that has been followed for this submission has been followed by Future Proof since 2009. So it's not a deviation for this particular. This has been the process that's been followed all the way since it started. It just so happens that I guess this particular issue has highlighted a deficiency in that process, and so I want to provide council a chance to amend that process with the next future
Right, and just
meeting.
very quickly remind me how are we going to remedy this for next time?
So Blair, can I just check, have you got that written up? Okay, so we'll have that up, that particular stuff that Blair's about to talk about.
It'd be helpful if you could adopt that in terms of our future procedures. Thank you.
So the procedure, Jeff, if our council passes that resolution, of course we're only one member of the partnership, but I would then formally ask Mr Tremaine, as the independent advisor of Future Proof, to prepare a report to the next joint committee meeting, in which he would raise that Hamilton City Council has requested that there's a change to the process upon which submissions are lodged by Future Proof, and ask that the joint committee support a small change to the terms of reference to cover that.
Just to finish, it concerns me that that's almost even necessary, because it feels to me if this is truly working as a partnership, it should be just an automatic thing that you would contact our two representatives before the decision's made, and then once the decision's made. It seems a very strange thing to me that in a spirit of partnership, with three councils involved here, that they wouldn't even be consulted before or after. And it worries me, to be honest, as a new elected member...
Jeff, should be a question at the end of this, please.
Yeah, why should I have confidence in Future Proof's processes?
Chairman, just to respond to it, we did work through the Future Proof Chief Executives Group because of the nature of this. I reported through to the Chief Executive Group across the partnership. I don't have any authority to act alone in this area.
We accept, Jeff, that the process could be better, hence the resolution that'll come up on the screen in a moment.
Yeah, my point is it just process or is it a mindset?
No, it's the first time it's ever happened in the years. And as I say, there was an intention for a meeting, but there was insufficient business when we didn't need to come back with the actual update because the committee had dealt with it.
Right. So are you apologising for this?
Well, yeah, I am. It's unfortunate, and
it's very unfortunate.
In almost 10 years, it's the first time it's happened.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll take that as an apology. Thank you.
Just be aware that's the resolution at this stage, so while we're talking we can have that in our minds too. Siggy, thanks.
Yeah, I'll just ask something really simple and easy, because future-proof is also about trees and things as well. And I just noticed a few pages there with blue and green. And do we need all that? I mean, it's nice to have pretty pictures, but empty spaces. I just feel for the trees. That's all.
You were given the summary document in its entirety, and because it was important out of the committee that we were requested to provide a summary document that was readable. And I'm sorry it's come with all those pages.
Okay.
It's a fair point.
Maybe next time we just can cut them out. That would be awesome. Thank you.
Ziggy, just to note that most of our business is conducted electronically, and Futureproof has a comprehensive website. We don't print these copies for wide circulation, so it's all done electronically.
And I know it's my mistake. I should go more electronic, but at the moment, not yet.
Thanks. Gary, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken. Has future-proof ever been used or part of blocking a rezoning before?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we just take part in the normal processes. I've never seen this, that side of things. No.
Gary, can I just say, I draw your attention to paragraph 30 of my report, which actually identifies that the new strategy in section 7.5 is actually looking to be far more flexible in the future in terms of working with opportunities, working with...
Sorry, I've got paragraph 30, there's a whole lot of bullet points. Where are you reading?
Sorry, from paragraph 26 through to paragraph 31.
Responding to change. Gotcha.
So I think the strategy has heard, in particular Hamilton's position, advocated by Mayor Andrew and Councillor McPherson, has been future-proof needs to be agile, future-proof needs to be flexible. Whilst we're looking for land use pattern and certainty of investment for infrastructure and working with NZTA, we also need to be highly agile and responsive to what's happening in the market. And so this section is really saying that future-proof has listened, the partnership's listened, and we're wanting to make sure that we don't put up obstacles and barriers for opportunities to develop residential and industrial opportunities in the sub-region. And so this is about looking at things not just within the Hamilton boundary, looking at things sub-regionally, looking at opportunities. And so those words there, and Ken can expand on those, is really saying this is a paradigm shift for future-proof to try and make sure that we are an enabler, not an obstacle.
Because that's what we're doing at the moment, aren't we? We're blocking it. Well, future-proof, beg your pardon, is standing against or opposing a rezoning.
But I pick up your Chief Executive's point. We're very, very keen to work with the applicant to get this matter resolved. But we'd like it resolved now before we start the long process, rather than having it disrupted down along the journey, which will then take more time.
So your response is we're getting it flexible and nimble and all that sort of stuff. What does that mean?
Well, Gary, I think can I take you away?
Because we've got some words written on a paper, which is what future-proof is supposed to be doing. Does that mean changing some of those words and the meanings of things?
I think of it more holistically in terms of our long-term plan and the debate we're going to have around growth in the coming days, and I guess the future land areas for Hamilton in terms of where Hamilton needs to grow. So future-proof is not just about a particular plan change coming in front of us today. It's about long-term land use planning for the sub-region. So it's about thinking about what's the flexible mechanisms for R2 and HT1 to come into the city? How do we deal with the land inside Southern Links to the south of the city? What about the land to the east of the expressway? What about where does industrial and commercial land get provided for businesses, not just in the Hamilton context, but in the context of Horatu, Hautapu, Titanium Park at the airport, our land. So future-proof is about starting to say, let's not have a rigid framework that prevents us from looking at good opportunities. Let's find ways to have solutions to work with the market. So that's what it's about.
Okay, so would that mean a reworking of the future-proof document? Because the future-proof document is full of thou shalt do this there, thou shalt not do that there. There's a lot of stuff that it's kind of like a bigger version of our district. Well, it's not quite so complex, but it's similar to our district plan in terms of the way it sets where things shall go and where things shall not go.
It sets the macro picture, but then the individual partners, particularly the regional council, and our work in here in terms of the flexibility is aimed at the regional policy statement and getting some flexibility built into that. That's sort of where we are. We need to set the...
So you accept the current model is not flexible enough?
Is
Correct.
that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
But we
So,
also,
so how would you go about, you'd have to change words, you have to change the whole,
we'll set up some criteria that as long as they're met, you can actually consider a more flexible view. There's been some pioneering work done, for example.
so just give an example of the
Gary,
criteria.
just let him finish that one.
Well,
please.
hang on, the purpose for this is for me to get information,
Yeah,
so I know when I'm getting
but
the
when you
information
ask
I
the
want, when I'm
question,
not getting the information I want.
Gary,
I think I know what I want from my question.
Yeah, but Gary, nevertheless, I'm sure you do, it's polite when someone's in mid-flight of their answer to your question, even if it's longer than you wanted, to let them finish. I'm not going to stop you
I'm just
asking
trying to
questions.
redirect them to the question I've asked, but so what would be the things that you'd change?
We would change the frame of the RPS to be more open in what can be considered as long as a series of criteria are met, and we would be working away alongside the individual district plans as well.
Okay. So at the moment, the future proof is similar to our district plan in that it tends to talk in terms of activities.
In the broad sense, because you've got one of the major partners, particularly NZTA, your banker, that is very interested in at the macro scale, the bigger picture activities and where they go in relation to its own investment.
So how do you get away from a paradigm that is based on activities, either roads, industrial, retail, whatever, into what I think we need to be doing, which is the impacts?
I think where you, and this will come back to your LTP, where you're having to provide infrastructure, and you're financially pretty stretched in doing that, you need some certainty around where things are going. Now, it's a matter of not being so rigid that you can't do anything. On the other hand, the NZTA would not be looking for an open-ended land use pattern.
Yeah, but are they worried about where roads are going, or are they worried about the impacts?
They're concerned about the effects of development on their their investments of the state highway network in particular.
Gary, there's another layer to this as well.
In the corridor between Auckland and Hamilton.
There's another layer to this as well, which is the second stage of the Future Proof Review. So today we're asking you to adopt the strategy now, but there's a second stage of the strategy review, which is in the next year. And a lot of that is going to be focused around two things. One is the long-term plan outcomes in terms of where councils get to with their investment decisions, including both the 10-year and the 30-year infrastructure strategies. But secondly, the national policy statement assessments for both residential and commercial land, which really speaks to some of the things you're starting to talk about in terms of where types of development can occur and the flexibility that we may be able to then bring to the table in terms of areas that may have been identified for a certain type of usage being more flexibly applied. And so that's the second stage of the strategy. So the first stage, adoption today, is really setting up the platform for that work. It's also giving NZTA and our other partners certainty in terms of development at the moment. And NZTA in particular are concerned about in the North Waikato, there's no future-proof strategy in operation because that part of the old Waikato district, sorry, the old Franklin District Council wasn't covered by future-proof. The second stage next year will pick up greater levels of flexibility that you've been asking questions about. So we're certainly heading down that path. And then the third stage is then working with the regional council to seek changes to the RPS to make that document far more flexible to deal with the things that Ken's been raising. And that's the direction that the strategy partnership is working towards.
In terms of gaining flexibility and nimbleness and all this stuff, do you think you're better off in categorising things by activity or by impact? And by that I mean who really cares whether it's industrial or residential or whatever? What matters is the noise, the traffic movement, the mitigation of sewage and stormwater and those sorts of things, irrespective of whether or not it's these somewhat artificial labels, which are the activity they do. Because what used to be called in manufacturing 300 years ago was big, the satanic mills and whatnot. Nowadays, manufacturing is totally different. Is that what you mean by flexibility? Or is it, because I'm concerned you say flexible, which means when we make a mistake, we'll fix it.
No.
And we'll change the plan, which is what we do now. We've made a mistake, well, let's fix it.
It's a matter
I think using your name, you can future-proof. My belief is, and I could be wrong, but everything I've seen in the 10 years I've been involved in this, or 15 years I've been involved in this, is the flexibility is gained more by focusing on the impacts or the effects, or whatever you want. I'm not too sure what the right word is there. Effects or impacts of the activity rather than the activity itself, because the activity evolves as technology and innovation occurs.
Oh, yeah. I take your point, Councillor, that a lot of the activities, of course, are much more mixed than they were, and that's fine. And it's a matter of, I don't think we're sort of standing in the way of those. There are some principles that need to be applied in there, but the really big thing is to have some certainty about the nature of the infrastructure you need, particularly the transport, to manage the effects, and that's where NZTA is from an investment point of view.
Yeah, still not sure you got it, but anyway.
Well, that's a matter for debate afterwards, but Paula.
Excellent to hear you speaking so much towards the RMA and an effects-based approach to Gary. No, I was just... Yeah. In terms of this, and as you know, I've been on this journey since the beginning of this document as well. Are you confident that, I see you've still got the targets, so you've gone from the targets perspective, and this is about cumulative effects as well, not just the localised effect of any one activity. So does this document fit better with the regional policy statement in terms of allowing that flexibility that we're all seeking? You know, the world changes, industrial land changes, but still providing for the base principles and targets.
Yes.
So, because I read it and I thought, yes, you know, I can see the language has been softened, but you've still got your targets to aim for.
Correct. Yeah, and we've still got quite a lot of the toolkit, but there's a need to adjust the actual RPS, and part of this work, doing it in 2 stages, is to work with the regional council to make sure that happens. And
so the bits, also question, the bits on page 169 of the agenda, which is 18 of the document, I think, appended. What we want for growth areas, you've got there's a bit from Hamilton City, Cambridge, the main centres, of which quite a few sit in the Waikato district. All of those particular district councils and city council, in the case of Hamilton City, helped to draft those aspirations for growth.
Yes, they did.
So we should be fairly confident that the wording that sits there for Hamilton City was approved by the governance members, which is Mayor Andrew and... So that we should be quite confident that those, whatever number of bullet points, reflect the direction that this council wants.
This work was inserted into the strategy by the partnership that had a workshop on it.
That's what I'm saying.
And didn't feel that part of what Future-Proof was doing was perhaps well understood, and we needed to really record a story for each of the partners. And that's what's here.
Yeah, and so the point is that we've already bought into this at some extent, at least at that governance level of those members who were represented.
That was reported back to the hearings, which comprised the representatives of the individual partners.
Yeah, and this, you mentioned about the Pukekohe Franklin area that came in, that changed since the original RPS because it was rezoned into the Waikato. So do you believe now that, and then the horse just bolted out of those gates straight away, so do you feel that this addresses the new world now that we've got all that development north?
Yes, there are targets set in there, particularly for Pokeno and Tuakau, which directly relate to NZTA's program business case, which the board wanted to see before it would invest in the highway upgrade between Te Kauwhata and Auckland.
So I see there have been some little pullbacks in Waikato, but there's still quite an aggressive regime of growth in the Waikato district. I remember when we first negotiated targets, we were going to see doubling of Raglan, Te Kauwhata, Huntly, Ngaruahia, Meremere, the whole world in the Waikato was going to double. Have we made any progress in that arena?
I think there's a realism now that a lot of what's the art of the possible is what you can afford to service. And there are 4 towns in there in the northern Waikato of Huntly, Te Kauwhata, Pokeno and Tuakau. And of course the links between Tuakau and all of the SHA developments to do with Pairata and the expansion of Pukekohe, etc. they're focused on those, but I think the work that the NZTA board has really forced to be done has put some boundaries around. The hard thing in the north is that is just to manage the displacement pressures out of Auckland and not to colonise the highway.
And I know I've just turned some of my colleagues off and going, oh, why is she even talking about Pocono? But what I'm seeing is the interconnect between development in the north.
Correct.
There's an implication for transport rights, that highway, within, actually even right now, Te Kaupara slows everyone down on their way north, doesn't it? But and also the what Hamilton is aspiring to do as a growth city will be impacted upon what the surrounding districts do.
We're looking at the two hubs, Hamilton and Auckland. We're not looking at a string of beads between them. And that's really the issue.
Can I just say, Paula, also, Mayor Sanson, who's on the Joint Committee, is certainly very supportive of this. In fact, is desperately wanting this to come into play, because they are wanting to have a framework as well to help them manage and respond to
extreme growth there.
Yeah.
Correct. So this actually helps them specifically also address that issue first and foremost. So they have worked very closely with Ken and the team to get their needs addressed in this document as well for that specific.
They've got a number of plan changes. There's a 1,500 lot one, which you'll be aware of for Te Kaupara, for example, and there's a smaller one and a much larger one expected for Pocono, and everyone's been very keen to put some a frame around those things. So in particular, the district council itself can work on what it can service and really what the costs are and who pays for what.
That's right, and that's the whole amenity question in terms of Hamilton's got to consider that outside areas do come and use our community assets and facilities and may not, as you have mentioned many times, Martin, may not contribute financially to them, but may provide a pressure on those services. So that's why I'm talking about the wider region, not just to waste time here. One further question. About industrial land, and I don't want to be specific to any particular development, because there again, that's an area in which the world has changed. What we thought would happen in Ruakura, what we thought would happen in Titanium Park, what we thought would happen in North Hamilton. But overall, we did do some projections around industrial supply, light industry and heavy industry.
Yes.
Have we still got sufficient land set aside for industry in the future?
Still in the process of going through that with the MPS, but my answer in a general sense is yes. But the important thing for some of the areas like Te Rapa North, Horatu, what's the role out into the future? It's not just the land supply. Have you got enough to meet particular needs?
Yeah, so as the whole economy changes.
Changes, yes, and it's a matter of anticipating those sorts of things, and that was quite extensively debated during the submissions
and that would include, well, apart from manufacturing and stuff, that would include logistics, because that's a big business.
Yeah, you get these large scale, and you're very used to them here, but you get the Port of Auckland relocating a whole dry port. Now that's one of three hubs, Horatu, Longburn, and the I-Zone just out of Rolleston. And those are a rail substitute for the coastal shipping that New Zealand is too small to support long term. So those things become very important, because that's part of the displacement of Auckland. Even if you get a third line, there's not enough land left at in Wiri to actually house that. So those things change the nature of demand, and it's a matter of making sure that those are catered for properly.
I think we're getting into the into the danger of a two-way planning discussion here rather
I think
than
those were all fair questions.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure they were questions, but anyway, you got them.
I think they were.
Okay, I had a couple of questions. One of our key partners in Future Proof is Waikato District Council. They put in a submission to the Te Awa Lakes proposal, did they not?
Yes.
And was that a neutral submission?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
and the reason they discussed it with me, I was well aware of it, they didn't have the capacity to do the analysis and thought that was as far as they could go.
But they wanted to be involved.
They wanted to be involved in the process.
Yep, yep.
And that was the sole reason for the neutrality.
Okay.
The lack of analysis.
So they didn't see the need to take the lead from Hamilton City specifically?
No, they wanted an opportunity to participate.
Yep. Okay. In terms of flexibility in the plan, in the future-proof plan, one of the things, was it not, that was talked about at the hearings was if a project like Te Awa Lakes comes in wanting a different use for industrial land, that one of the outcomes may not be to say no, it might be to say where else would you get industrial land to make up the lost capacity. Is this future-proof document flexible enough to allow us to take that stance as opposed to an opposition stance?
It's sent enough in the story that's been told in the relevant part of the strategy that's referred to here in the report. It's set up to actually do the drafting for the RPS, and that's going to be one of the things worked on in the early part of next year.
So will this RPS that things like our council never really get a say about, will that be flexible?
Well, and no doubt it'll come back here in some shape or form because there'll be changes made to it. Setting up some criteria, and you'll have a look at them and you'll test them against your own knowledge and where you think things are heading in the future as to whether they meet your expectations.
Yeah, but was not some of the desire for flexibility to enable us to, whichever council, to take opportunities that might set...
Yes, and Blair's outlined that, yeah.
And Huntly North being another one, which was not currently industrial land, which the district council up there was proposing might be seen as future industrial.
Yes, I think I think where the future-proof strategy is heading, Dave, is very much in line with what you are asking questions about. To find opportunities to work to get those solutions.
And the second edition of this, or the second phase, I should say, of this, is going to incorporate the new government's policy statements.
Yep. Yes. Assuming they're far enough along, and hopefully, yes. Yes, absolutely. We are across what's happening in that urban space.
So would it be fair to say this document is mostly designed to get North Waikato into the future-proof fold?
Correct.
But the more
at NZTA's request, yes, and the sufficient...
Hang on,
oh, sorry.
The more substantive changes to the way it might work will come once we see which way the government wants to go.
And also your own LTP, etc., and what happens to the housing, the HIF fund, etc., and different models for delivering on urban growth, both funding and delivery. Yes.
Right. We've got a staff recommendation up there, which is what Blair has been talking about.
Sorry, it's a bit long, but
Sorry? Yeah, I'm not going to take that honour away from you, Paula, but I was just going to check with Blair that that is the staff recommendation still.
yes, C is the addition that I've referred to in terms of seeking the change to the submission process in the future.
And that's been moved by a very enthusiastic Councillor Southgate. Is there a seconder to equally enthusiastic Councillor Casson? I can see. Okay. Is there... Gary's concerned about the language, the grammar, was it?
Isn't that moved?
Yes, it should be motion, not resolution. It hasn't been resolved yet. They were just hoping that we would, so got into it. Okay. Any other issues with that for technical clarification? I'll take speakers now. Gary, did you want to speak?
Yeah, my concern to this is the same as I have around our own district plan, because they are similar types of documents. They're planning documents, and I think the weakness in them, and I'm, dare I commit a heresy and say I'm not against planning, but I think the problem we have is when we set out with our plans, we think we're dealing with impacts and effects and things like that, and we use as a proxy for those impacts and effects activities. So instead of dealing with traffic noise or sewage into water or stormwater or density or things like that, we start using words like residential, commercial, industrial, and unfortunately, fortunately, those tags are losing their reliability, in that there's so much innovation going on nowadays that what we used to call industrial is totally different from as I mentioned, the satanic mills of, who was it? Who wrote that song? Jerusalem? Whatever that song, anyway, if you know it, you should know it. That has changed dramatically. You look at the Gallagher campus now, the Gallagher industry. They've got logistics there, they've got manufacturing there, they've got commercial activity there, their marketing activities there, their R&D activities there. They could, if they wanted to, well, no, our district plan wouldn't probably allow it. They could put up a bloody whole lot of duplexes for their staff or something. Now, our district plan wouldn't allow that, even though there was no, and if there was an impact, it might be more cars coming in, and that would be what you would measure, not the activity. And that is my concern with all of our planning documents, is they're all focused on proxies for the things that we actually want to plan for, control or liberate. I'm not too sure what the right focus is there. So that has been my gripe about future-proof and our district plan all the way through. And it's funny because we start using words like nimbleness and flexibility and that stuff because these proxies don't work anymore. It's the weakness in those proxies that is causing us to have to, and we've had to smash huge holes in our district plan. These housing accords are all an acknowledgement that our district plan was not nimble enough, not flexible enough, because we started talking about industrial land and suddenly, hey, this is not industrial land, we can do housing with it. Dave's looking at the clock.
I couldn't possibly comment.
So that's my concern. We're going down the same. We are approving the same. And my understanding is this is sort of superior to our district plan. I don't know where it lands.
Your district plan.
Okay. All right. Okay. So yeah. Anyway, that's my concern with all of these things. I think they are trying. What they're trying to do, I think, is probably laudable. The way they go about it, I think, is wrong.
So, Gary,
I'll be not supporting it.
Thank you. I was going to ask you that. Okay, Paul, I admitted I should have to ask you first to speak, so I'll ask you now.
That's fine. I was going to save it for right of reply. It makes no difference.
Oh, okay. If you're happy with that, yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
I've got Councillor Gallagher who was next, and then yourself to finish.
Thank you. I think if you focus on item 44 around the importance of adoption, and you note that the strategy supports the newly operative district plan, Hamilton Urban Growth Strategy, and the staff proposal for growth in the draft 2018 10-year plan promotes sustainable, affordable growth in specific locations that use existing and proposed infrastructure. It supports government funding in the sub-region, including the proposed Southern Links, the proposed Waikato Expressway extension to Pairiri, the proposed commuter rail between Hamilton and Auckland, and advocacy for transport options which will further support Hamilton's economic outcome. Obviously, you also need to read this future-proof document and relate it also to the Waikato plan. I will say that's, obviously I'll be supporting the recommendation, particularly around the fine-tuning, if you like, the interface, again, between the professionals and the governance team for this particular project. I also will say that, and this is not a poke at the previous council at all, because we now meet at 9:30 in the morning, we now actually, the result is we actually giving a lot more time to Waikato Plan and Future Proof. In the previous term, just because how it was a 5-minute wonder, and I'm really delighted now that we are having a really constructive discussion, that we're really getting our heads around it, and obviously that accompanies the views of the contrast, say, between Councillor Mallett and myself. At least that can be thoroughly discussed. I also want to pay tribute to the incredible professionalism of our professional advisors and staff, particularly Ken Tremaine, who, if any of you don't know, but you probably do, has had a very, very long history and would be one of New Zealand's top planners right from his days at Palmerston North City Council. If you actually want to look at a vibrant region who had a 10-year jump on us, go to Greater Tauranga. And boy, did they get cracking. And he and other members were in the middle of the Tauranga, the Western Bay growth strategy. Obviously, they were very proactive in embracing and recognising the growth that they were about to confront, and I'm really pleased that we are now putting this document and the Waikato plan front and centre, particularly for the huge growth of our Waikato, of this particular sub-region. I agree with Gary in the sense that I think we must always be fine-tuning, looking, and using a namesake company, really good example of how sort of economic activity and the focus of economic activity changes, you know, how that changes, and how does a plan adapt, if you like, to that. The other thing, of course, is because I believe this region took the eye off the ball, we have crazy use and gobbling up of productive agricultural land into, say, the lifestyle block phenomenon, whereas if you go overseas, UK is a good example, you can still have the villages where people enjoy a rural outlook and aspect, but surrounding that village is still a productive working farm. Here, of course, how many working farms have we lost in the last 20 or 30 years? And if we want to remain, obviously, as a major productive agricultural, horticulture area, then that can't continue. So I'm hoping that in effect, Future-Proof also helps us in that regard, still allowing people to enjoy, if you like, that rural lifestyle, but perhaps in a slightly more sensible way. So I do support the motion.
I'm going to Mayor King next, because Paula has indicated she'll be the right of reply at the end.
So, I guess when we've got a city in the middle of rural areas on either side, and they want to increase their rate space as fast as they can, the temptation's huge for subdivision without proper planning around those areas and around those regions, because the temptation for those councils around us is to increase their rate space by subdividing. And that's partly what Future-Proof and then the RPS, and then below that, you know, you've got the district plan, the Waikato plan, which doesn't have any regulatory authority. Then you've got Future-Proof and the RPS, and I can see exactly what they're doing, but I also have a concern that they can be misused, and they can take away the autonomy of the individual councils. And I don't have an answer to this issue. I just know it's we're trying to do the best we can through these layers, but it's not necessarily working very well. And I'm not saying that to put any blame on anyone. I just do have concerns that we have actually given away our autonomy in Hamilton City, and our neighbours and other entities have a say on what we can and can't do when it comes to rezoning. And I don't really know if that's quite right, and the same as us having a say on what our neighbours do. And that is a concern. Well, because obviously I was in the implementation committee, and I did push for the responding to change sections that have gone in here, thank you, Ken. And we worked well together on that. But I do see, and I guess as with politics and with technical matters, it can't always be perfect. And this isn't perfect, but it's probably the best we know what to do at this stage. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm just going to speak briefly now to insert myself in here before Paula. I'm going to support the resolution. I'm not wildly enthusiastic about the document, a bit like Mayor Andrew just then, but I do think there is an urgent need to include the North Waikato in the thing. Otherwise, it's going to be quite difficult to get NZTA to stump up the funding up in the north. And having seen a lot of that growth up there in the last 4 or 5 months, I know there's a big need for some support up there. I think that we've always had this attitude in Hamilton, really. We'll pretty much support whatever the other districts want to do in their towns. We've had a concern, which we did want to put some controls over, about what happened immediately around our town, and Future-Proof in the early days was helpful for that, because the whole issue of lifestyle blocks chewing up productive land and making it very hard for this city to grow when it needed to grow was a very big issue for us. If we had lifestyle blocks literally around our boundary, it would have made it very hard to take on some of those areas into the city, and it still is hard, but it would have been harder had we not had future-proof. It was basically the means for us negotiating a deal with the surrounding councils so that they kept in their towns and we kept in our town and grew in somewhat orderly fashion, logistically manageable fashion. So that has been useful. I don't think it's yet flexible enough. I don't think the planning attitudes and culture is yet flexible enough. To that extent, I possibly agree with Gary that we're using a few outdated mechanisms rather than looking at the real needs. But like Andrew, I think it's probably the best we're going to get in the short run. So I'm going to support this going forward, noting that there's a bit of a change in plans so that there'll be political input. And future-proof is more political in some ways and should be than the district plan. It should be where the three councils, and I sort of leave aside the regional council because I think that's a whole new kettle of fish, and sometimes the fish doesn't smell that good. But the district councils and the city council are the ones that have to actually work out how to service the growth areas in there, and that's why it's important for us to work together on that. For that reason, future-proof is helpful to us. So I'm going to support that. Paula, it's your right of reply. Thanks. And
Thank you. You normally get less time for a right reply, but I'm assuming I can take...
You can take the full
Thanks.
5. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Not that I intend to, but, just in case.
But no more than 5.
All right, brilliant. So I'm happy to move this. I think it has made some improvements. I thank the staff and Mayor Andrew and Dave for the work that they've done on it, because I know it's always been a fairly robust debate at Future-Proof to hold your own position, when you've got competing interests. And that's what this is about. It's managing competing interests for the well-being of the whole. Now, I think we've got to remember that this is a strategy, not a plan. It's a strategy, but it is given weight to in the regional policy statement, to which even our own district plan as a city must give effect, which is the highest planning language that you get. We can't opt out or opt in. So the strategy was a way of finding some agreement to meet our obligations under the regional policy statement. And at that time, and I don't think it's moved very far, government was particularly favourable to areas of the country that had growth strategies. There was also a growth strategy in the Coromandel. And they liked the fact that people collaborated and designed a future. I don't think we can build a strong future for Hamilton without considering the connections and interconnections with our neighbours and surrounding district. I actually support 100% what Martin and Dave have said about ensuring that we protect productive land. And that's land for farming, but it's also, and lifestyle blocks and what have you, but it's also about productive land in general, whether that's industrial or some other economic use. And because we need that, we need to generate economic return to Hamilton, and we need land to do that from, whether it was a logistics hub, a manufacturing hub, a retail hub, whatever it is. We need to make sure that we provide for that opportunity going forward, in my view. And also the other thing is that we need to protect from reverse sensitivity, because nothing's worse than having to turn down an activity that could be really useful to the community, but you can't put it there because it's going to affect negatively the people to whom it's next door. So, by having some kind of broad framework, you can avoid things like that. You can say, well, this is the right place for this kind of thing, and we will avoid a lot of that peri-urban conflict between residential and other uses of land. So strength is in the whole, really. The strength is in the whole. If we work well with our neighbours, we benefit, they benefit. So on that note, I'll stop, Mr Mayor. Mr Chair. Oh, whoops. Mr Mayor and Mr Chair, but I'll stop anyway.
Yeah, quit while you're ahead. Okay, councillors, can we go to the board? I think we better. There. there's the resolution on the wall.
The motion is carried. 10 for, 1 against.
Thanks. Councillors, can we quickly move on to item 15, which is also it's a future-proof report for information. Sorry? It's been moved. Yeah, thank you, Paula. 188, seconded by James. That old team again. The enthusiastic team. Okay. Keith, is it? Yeah. Hi, Keith. Do you want to introduce that briefly and tell us any pointers that you'd like?
Certainly. Good afternoon, all. So, just for your information, this is the first report that's been produced to meet the quarterly monitoring requirements under the recent National Policy Statement on Urban Development Capacity. And the real purpose, as directed by the National Policy Statement, is to provide key decision makers with across the future-proof sub-region with timely information on changes that may affect the sufficiency of our development capacity. For example, certain indicators that may suggest that demand might be increasing more rapidly than expected. So just to note that whilst there is a degree of overlap with some of the other HCC growth indicator reports that were this committee considered earlier today, this future-proof quarterly market indicator report has a particular purpose. The Hamilton City Council quarterly indicator reports is looking at growth, indicators of growth more generally. This is particularly focused on indicators of that may suggest there's a lack of sufficiency. Also, sufficiency of supply, whether the demand exceeds our available capacity. And also it has that wider geographic scope encompassing the Waikato and Waipa districts within the future-proof sub-region. And it also has a narrow audience, so this is specifically for key decision makers such as yourselves. The HCC growth reports, I understand, have a wide audience, a more public audience. That is to say, we are required or encouraged to make this report publicly available. So, as the purpose of the report is for you as key decision makers, I'd welcome any questions or feedback on what's contained within the report, how, if you found it useful, or if there's any clarifications or questions that you may have.
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I've got questions really around the timeliness of the report and some of the dates in the report. Who prepares this?
I was the lead author on this report. There was a number of data sources we used, some of which MB have compiled a dashboard, so some of these indicators are comparable across the country. Okay. Some of the information of the data sources which are used in those are delayed or staggered, so some of the release of the information is delayed. As this was the first report that was produced, there was a delay in publishing some of those indicators on the dashboard. As this, there was also the release of the guidance in order to develop these reports was only finalised a couple of months ago. So whilst this is the first report for the June quarter, due to all of those and also due to the collaborative nature of formulating this report, seeking input and comment from our partners, and then the reporting cycles of both Future-Proof and this council, hence there is a delay getting it to you now only in December, almost 6 months later. However, as we become more proficient at producing these, I expect that time will come down, just recognising that there will always be a delay with the release of some data.
So given that the document is pretty important to us, as a growing city and and we're hearing indications that the market is softening a little bit and so forth, and we need to be, I use that word nimble again, to be able to respond quickly. When do you think we will have the September report, which I assume is going to get into a little bit of momentum now that you've got the first report out?
So MB updated the dashboard just last week for the September results. Not all of the indicators were updated again due to the availability of information. So I have planned to produce at least a first draft of the next report by the end of the year. So looking ahead to council, the next opportunity of the G&I committee, I believe, is in February. Or thereabouts, so I'm hoping that we can have it available for that committee meeting.
So if we flick over to page 201 on our report, there's some CBD retail vacancy rates that go back to December 16, and there's industrial vacancy rates that also go back to December 16.
Yep.
Those figures are likely to be more current, are they, in future reports, or will we still be constrained, or will you still be constrained in terms of being able to get more up-to-date figures?
Yes, I'll still be constrained, unfortunately. For example, with the industrial vacancy rates, we've relied on the industry leaders who produce that report. That's only an annual. They do an annual survey.
Right.
So I believe that is the industrial one is released in January. So there might be an opportunity to include that one, but yes, it's really going to depend on the timing of the quarters.
Okay, I noticed further down on that page, you've got some Collier's information that is September 17. So I guess there'll always be other bits of information that you can overlay into those reports that are perhaps more up to date.
That's correct, and we will also look to supplement some of this information with some of our internal data, as is in the growth report. Right. So yeah, they might, whilst one indicator might not be available, we could look to introduce another one just to provide some indication of what.
And what's the final question is, what's the cost of preparing the report, and how is it shared with our other councils and transport agency and so forth?
So to date, other than my time, there's been no cost. If we do identify some other data, for example, the core logic bioclassification for Hamilton on page 197, if we were looking to procure the same graph for for Waikato and Waipa, there would be a small cost of a matter of a few $100s to do that. Mm-hmm. And I'm actively looking for other indicators which may come at additional cost, but yeah, as I said, to date, other than my time, there's been no cost.
But I think Rob, or at least what I took out of Rob's question was, is there a cost to Future-Proof and the other councils, or is it all on us? Your time is all on the City Council? So
the Future-Proof partners have provided commentary and review of this report. So there has been
but all the staff time is funded by Hamilton.
Yeah, that was, I guess, where I was leading to in the question. Yeah, right. And you know, we should be. Yeah. There should be some sharing of those costs if there's a benefit to the other councils, and to NZTA and whoever else is listed on that front page.
So just to clarify, it's not a requirement of Future-Proof that we do this report, it's a requirement of the NPS National Policy Statement, and because we're part of the high growth areas, that's why we do it. And because that area takes a wider sensor area than Hamilton City, it then became sensible to also do a wider area, but the cost would fall on us anyway. But your point is valid. If there is value then going out, then we can then talk to them about sharing.
At least NZTA should subsidise it like they would a road, since they're using it. 51%.
Quite possibly. I'm just giving the context as to where it sits. But your point's well made.
And I take it we also draw on our Infometrics. Do we still subscribe to Infometrics?
That's correct.
So we use that in the report too? That's often more up to date too, isn't it, than some of the other data you've got in here?
The infometric indicators are specifically economic indicators. So these look at a range of others, some of which are prescribed by the NPS, the National Policy Statement on Urban Development Capacity. So certainly, whilst the infometrics indicators give a range of indicators of economic growth, this is looking specifically at sufficiency of land supply.
So we can't get infometrics perhaps to vary their reporting around a little bit so it can fit into this, that their reports are generally more, are generally more timely than perhaps some of the dates in this report, and the continued constraint that you might have in terms of some of those older dates and the newer reports.
Certainly something we could explore with them.
Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, and Paula and Gary have got one question each. Well, I can live in hope.
Well, I had two, anyway. The graph on the top of page 197, which is the buyer classification for Hamilton, can you just explain here again? Teensy tiny, sorry, it's really hard to digest and even concentrate on at this small scale. Yeah, no, it's not, it's a comment, sorry. Just in terms of the legend in the middle of the graph, I get first home buyers. What's a mover? What's a new to market other? And what's a re-entry?
I'm not certain of all of the definitions, but a mover would be someone selling, moving within, selling a house and buying a house within Hamilton.
Okay, yeah. So I did find this graph really hard to see because of the size of it, but one thing's quite clear from it, isn't it, that the multiple property owners have remained the main buyers. So can we assume from that those are the more costly properties and their developers, or you just think that some lucky people have owned lots of properties?
Sorry, which category are you referring to?
The last sentence in the text says multiple property owner, and it's the little blue, it's the bluey grey line at the top. Multiple property owners in Hamilton have remained the main buyer category. So those are big building companies, developers, or the like?
No, not necessarily. That could be property investors in a range of...
well, that's what I mean by developers, sorry, property investors.
But that could be your mum and pop buying a rental, not just your larger developers.
So is there any way of looking underneath those numbers to know exactly who they are? Because it's just interesting who's buying versus what we're talking about a lot in council is how to get the first home owner in their first home. So I'm trying to understand what's going on behind these numbers, because it will help us make the right decisions.
But just looking at the trend, so the multiple over the period from about 2010 to recently, there has been some seasonal variation there, but it's been fairly stable around 25%. I mean, the most significant change there, which I've noted, is the activity from Auckland multiple property owners. Mm-hmm. So as they were displaced from Auckland by the introduction of the LVRs, you can see that activity shifting south into Hamilton. But as the new LVRs were then introduced to the rest of the country, you can see that rapidly dropping off. And I mean, just comparing that period of increased activity by that category to the rise in prices, there's some correlation there.
Okay, thank you. And one more final question, on page 201, around the industrial vacancy rates. There again, I don't know if anybody can answer this, but just right now, but flag that I'm interested in the overall occupancy. It says all grades except for grade C have experienced a decrease in vacancy over this period. What does that mean exactly? Actually, I'm not really very familiar with the grading, so that would maybe sometimes someone can help me through that to know, because I'm interested in where those properties are, because then we can target our interventions appropriately. Does that make sense?
So understood, and I can certainly provide that information for you. One of the purposes of the indicators is, though, to look at broader trends. So whilst certainly if there's an indication that that there is efficiency or there is an issue emerging, it does require further investigation. I don't think we should. We shouldn't necessarily identify an issue just from one particular graph.
No, but then there's no point looking at interesting graphs if you don't do anything with the data that they give you.
Certainly, yeah. So my point was that it was looking at the trend. So if there is a so the other graph on page 201. I mean, so if there's that declining trend there, then there's definitely to understand that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks, Keith. On page 194, residential indicators, second paragraph down, I think it's still the same sentence. It says, talks about whilst number of consents issued have largely kept pace with the demand for new dwellings, a shortfall in supply appears to be emerging, most noticeably in Hamilton. This may indicate the presence of barriers to supply of housing land. So the rationale for these reports, and I understand it, there's raw data that you've done a little bit of analysis on, and then trying to make some sort of logical conclusion from that. And I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but that's what's happening, eh? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, certainly looking at those trends and trying to understand what they may be suggesting.
Okay, so further investigation is required to understand what, if any, barriers there are to building more homes to meet demand, blah, blah, blah. So it would be a logical response from that the special housing accords, I mean, I know the two aren't linked because this has only just come out and special housing accords have been around for 18 months now, but that is where these the information on this, and Paula's gone now, but Paula talked about interventions and things like that. This should drive decision making.
Yes, informed decision making. Yes.
Okay, yeah. So, however, there are no recommendations with this. So, is it not your intention to get that precise? So, you've given us some analysis, and you've given us sort of this may, and that's all right, so long as we know where this stands in the hierarchy of staff reports to us, I suppose. So, what is the intention of this report?
So that it would provide key decision makers with a. So firstly, recognising that housing and business markets they operate beyond administrative boundaries. So this gives us some idea, gives a picture of activity that's occurring beyond just Hamilton.
Yeah.
And then, so it will enable us to track short and long-term trends in housing and business markets and hopefully provide a little bit more of a nuanced understanding of some of those dynamics. And then through the interpretation to provide an ongoing narrative about how the indicators collectively reveal trends in supply and demand, and also how those market changes might be affecting this efficiency. So it provides sort of a context, a picture of what may be occurring, or what is occurring, and some interpretation of that. So it's to.
So that's important. But so you get data, and we hope the data is accurate. And you're not collecting. You aren't the data supplier. You recruit the data, I assume, and then make some sort of analysis of it, and then you seem to stop there. You don't go much further than there in terms of conclusions or recommendations, or this is what is that's what the intention was, to give us data at that level, or was the intention that you'd go further and say, no, look, for God's sake, you need to do so.
So actually, just to take a step.
Kelvin's jumping up too, so he might be able to help.
The context in which this requirement in the NPS is, so there's a requirement that we conduct these assessments quarterly, but there is also the bigger assessment of demand and capacity across the future-proof region that's been conducted. So these quarterly reports would provide a view in between the requirement to do the comprehensive assessment, which is every 3 years. So once you have a full picture of the exact extent of your capacity, this provides some view before you're required to conduct the next one.
So Gary, you're exactly right. So you've heard us talk about the supply work that Keith's just referred to. That gives us a baseline. Then this report would then be able to work off that baseline to say, are we keeping up to date with it? And then to your point, okay, you've got a trend. What is the restriction to house building, for example?
Yeah.
Is it building, what is it? Because we haven't done that supply base, this is just the timings out in terms of getting this requirement through the SHA.
Okay.
Then we'll get the baseline, then we go forward.
Thank you. And so, and Rob brought up the point that unfortunately, a lot of the data is a little old, and that's not your fault. That's just because the providers only do it such and such.
That's great.
So leaving aside that weakness, but you've done the best you can. Is there any thought that this will go another step and say, therefore, we recommend? Because I think all we're doing is receiving this report, aren't we?
It's all we're doing, and we're going to do it quite soon.
Yeah, but I mean, but is there any intention that anything more than that will come from these reports? Because by the sounds of it, they're driven, and I have, to be honest, I haven't quite listened to everything that's been said. And so it's a requirement of future-proof that this report's done, is it?
I mean, so this is the wider sub-regional work, and then we drill down to the ones you saw previously today. It's really at that level, that's what we can be using to indicate what we need to do as Hamilton City. But to Keith's point, there are factors that influence Hamilton City that this picks up that also we can do through partners. So yes, the short answer is yes, the intent is to get to a point where we have data of a level and analysis of a level, which we didn't have 2 years ago, but we've definitely got it now, that we can give you and say this is the issue that we believe is holding us up.
So would you start we are not meeting our future-proof obligations type of thing because, alerting us to that sort of stuff? So it's us trying to...
Yes, hence the reason...
It's our managing our performance within the future-proof ambit.
In the NPS requirement, across the sub-region and then as a city in terms of that number. So it is confusing because you've got the future-proof sub-region, you've got Hamilton City, and then the NPS requirement is that, remember there's a weird census data requirement which picks up a little bit out towards Morrinsville and a little bit north, and a little bit, so it's a weird... But that is the intent.
Okay, councillors, so I'm going to... Paul has taken off, so I'm moving that this, and it's still seconded by James. Show of hands, those in favour, against, carried. Thanks. Now, councillors, there's a proposal, and the deputy mayor, the mayor isn't here, so that makes it a bit hard. And the CEO's not here, so we're not going to do that. They can do it. Right? Tough. They're going to have to do it tomorrow morning. Yep, because they're not here. Sorry, that was too... I'll tell you about it at the end of the meeting. There was a request for an extra item, a late item to be brought up, to be discussed. But if they're not here, by the two of them, neither of them are here, so we can't possibly... Yep, so... Okay, well, that's why we're going straight to the moving into closed shop. So I'm going to move the move that we go into public excluded for items C1 and C2 for the reasons outlined on page 207. Seconded by Councillor Bunting. Those in favour, against, carried. We're now in public